So, as mentioned, my name is Sabria Lagoun. I'm a PhD student in the Medical University of Vienna. And together we will explore today how technology can inspire itself from neuroscience. But beforehand, I have to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm not a neuroengineer, so I'm not doing this kind of translational studies myself, but I'm studying cognitive neuroscience, which is the study of thought process. However, I have some experience into science advocacy, and I do it through art, public speaking, and consulting for diverse companies. So when I think about what I want from a robot or an artificial intelligence, I'm often thinking that I would like it to finally be able to go around by itself without hitting the walls, to be able to take initiative, to understand rules implicitly, and to be able to learn without using giant data sets of training. So I want them to be able to learn quite quickly. And the interesting thing is that any insect is able to do this. So they have only a handful of neurons, but these neurons are so fit to function thanks to evolution that they're able to learn. And when I mean learn, I'm not kidding. Like researchers managed to train mosquitoes not to bite a specific person. So there's a lot to do here. So I know that a lot of you don't have a neuroscience background, so I decided to go for Neuroscience 101. Hopefully we'll get from the very basic and slowly build up the project. So the neuron, they are the cells of the brain that are responsible for most of our sensing and actions and thoughts and behaviors and movements. And they're made of dendrites that are here, a cell body, and an axon. And for some of you who are a bit more from the computational side, you can think that the dendrites are receiving inputs that are then going to be transformed by a transformation function of the cell body, and then sent by the output of the axon. And the axons can be meters long to be able to reach your muscles or other brain regions. So, of course, we're not talking about one neuron, but there are 100 billion neurons in the brain, and they're all highly interconnected. So you can imagine that the possibilities are very limitless. And on top of this, there's another complexity, is that, as you can see, there's not one neuron that looks like the other. Okay, they are groups of neurons that look quite different from each other. They all have weird shapes. And these shapes that are genetically determined are actually going to impact the way they're connected in the circuit, as well as their electrical properties, and not to mention all of the molecules that you can find and that are present in these neurons. And to add up, once again, to this complexity, you have to know that the brain is not an isolated system, of course. So it's constantly learning from, I'm trying to click, no, oops. Yeah, so it's basically constantly learning from emotions, family interactions,
basically, of a smart.
Oops, yeah, and this is what we call brain plasticity that I was illustrating here in an art project. So you have neurons that are all different from each other, they have different electrical properties that connect differently to each other, and on top of this system is constantly changing based on the experience. So when the people were trying to imitate the brain,
powerful.
They're trying to imitate it by reproducing the anatomy of the brain. This is one first approach. This is what we call neuroengineering. And the first approach to do it is to do neuromorphic hardware. Neuromorphic hardware is the idea that one neuron, even just one neuron, is a very low energy and very high processing unit. And if we can try to imitate this one neuron, maybe our processors will be more powerful. So I have to explain to you a small subtlety. When one neuron connects into another, actually there is an electrical impulse that travels through the axon, and at the end there are little bags of molecules that are liberated into the synapse, and then attaching to receptor present on neuron number 2. This would be neuron number 1, neuron number 2. These little molecules are called neurotransmitters. And this unit is called the synapse. And what happens is that you have many neurons that converged into many neurons number 1 that converged into the neuron number 2, and all of this will be added in time. And IBM managed to produce a processor that was inspired by these events, an event-based processor that they called True North, and that is a Synapse-inspired chip. And recently, it was published last year, one person managed to replace these little molecules by photons. And this is going to be, I think, one of the most promising advances in terms of processing, because as you know, the speed of light is pretty much unbeatable. The other idea is, okay, to be able to imitate this brain function, we're going to take a small animal and reverse engineer it neuron per neuron. So we're going to look at the whole anatomy of an insect, for example. And the way they do it is quite painful, because you have to, accumulate hundreds and hundreds of neurons, check their connections, and see how they react. So C. elegans is a perfect model. It's a worm. It has 302 neurons. And it's actually quite funny, because some people managed to use an algorithm to simulate these 302 neurons and put it into a Lego robot that was able to navigate through space with avoiding the walls and kind of reproduce the behavior, very simplistic behavior, but still autonomous behavior of a worm. And of course, they made it in open source and called it OpenWorm, so you can go download it and build your own Lego machine if you want to. And of course, spatial navigation, as you saw today, I think we mentioned it quite a lot in the other talks, is going to be one of the big topics in the future for our robots to be able to interact with humans, and also for our cars to be able to go around without hitting children. So the way we do it as humans is we try to reproduce our conscious spatial navigation. We think, okay, I have to know how the environment looks like, and if I'm able to map the whole surface of Earth, and I can say, okay, please go to the Tehu, or please go to Tombouctou, my robot will be able to do it. But if you think about it, very small insects are experts, are not getting lost, and they don't have this global system of vision of the world. And also they're really good at doing things that our drones or our robots are unable to do, which is go full speed through a tunnel or land on a moving target and such. So same phenomenon, they managed to extract all of the neuronal activity from what they call the lobula plate, and then reconstruct the circuits, neuron per neuron. And this is a graph of some of my teachers from Marseille. They're very kind enough to give them to me, Rufies and Serre. What they do is they first observe the sensors that the animals possess, as well as their behavior. And like this, they build this algorithm, and they say, if we are right, and this is the input that the animal needs, it should have this trajectory in a virtual environment. Then they take actual bees and flies and put them in these artificial environments with local contrast. What they discovered in their research is that the flies and the bees, they don't use this global positioning system, they don't have a GPS, but they just use very, very, very low resolution inputs, such as optic flow or elementary movement detectors. And these are circuits that take only 3 neurons. And what they do is they put the animals through the artificial environment, and they see that the behavior follows their hypothesis. So by using the inputs that they figured out as being relevant, they load it into drones, and then put the drones into the same environment as the bees or the flies, and realize that they figure out that they have the same behavior. So all of these terrain following, tunnel crossing, landing at constant slope, and landing on a moving target were things that could be achieved by using biomimetic strategies. Of course, this idea has limits. For example, there was a huge program launched by IBM called the Blue Brain Project, where they tried to tackle the mammal brain and reproduce it neuron per neuron. Unfortunately, the results of this project were quite disappointing. Of course, IBM gained a lot of knowledge into how to make processors, which is what they wanted. but they managed to reproduce 1/3 of a cubic millimeter of a cortical tissue of a rat. And even this, which was a big progress, is still less than 1% of the synaptic connections in the circuit. So this is from the official website, yeah. So we have to figure out a new strategy. And one of the new strategies could be using cognitive neuroscience, which is what I do, and combining it to AI. So the idea of cognitive neuroscience is to focus on mental function and try to explore not the anatomy neuron per neuron, but to try to understand which information is relevant for the brain to be used in memory or decision-making or whatever. So what we need to do is to monitor the neuronal networks at the neuronal scale and in space and time. We need to know where the neuron is, what is it doing through time, and we want to be able to synchronize it with the complex behavior also in space and time. Of course, you all know about EEG or fMRI. Unfortunately, the resolution of these methods are not ideal because the EEG has very low spatial resolution, and the MRI, which has a better spatial resolution, has a time resolution of 8 seconds, and there's a lot that can happen in 8 seconds in the brain. So we have to use more invasive methods in rats and mice, for example, and I take a second to tell you when I mean invasive. It doesn't mean that it's painful, and we take great care of our animals. We play with them, cuddle with them, train them every day, because we work on very, very complex tasks, and they need to be relaxed, so there is no torture happening in the lab. So we use electrodes that are chronically implanted, and we put an electrode into the brain, and we measure simply electrical signal in volts or microvolts. But of course, the problem is there's a bunch of neurons, and they're all speaking at the same time using very similar voices, and we cannot understand much if everybody speaks at the same time using very similar voices. So we hack it by putting multiple electrodes together, and the idea is that the closer the neuron is, the bigger the peak of their activation, what we'll record will be. And therefore, you will find a unique electrophysiological signature, so a unique combination of amplitudes for this neuron compared to this neuron. And this is how we manage to basically disentangle this whole signal. You can also buy a ready-made probe if you have a lot of money on the side. And this is a recording that I made myself, actually. And you can visually identify that this is neuron number 1, that is firing on the electrodes 1 to 5, neuron number 2, and then neuron number 1 again. So this is time, this is the amplitude in millivolts because it's amplified. You see neuron number 1, number 2, number 1. So of course we use algorithm to, to go through these gigabytes of data. And then we're able to understand which neurons says what and when. Another method, if you want to know where the cells are located, is to use calcium imaging. So calcium imaging is used on 3D moving animals, and basically it's a tiny microscope that you implant inside of their brain. These animals are genetically modified so that the neurons can flash up with fluorescent molecules whenever they are active. And so this is actually a free moving animal, and you can see the neurons light up whenever he's moving or going through a task. So these are the methods, and then what we need to do is, of course, absolutely control the behavior, otherwise we don't know what's happening. So we use maze or virtual environments, 3D virtual environments, and we use a set of sensors, video trackers, and state control machines to be able to make sure that we know when the stimulus is delivered, when the reward is delivered, and such. And of course we need to extract these rules of cognitive processing, meaning what is represented in the brain and what are the dynamics of learning. I give you one example. Here we have a neuron recorded in a monkey, and he gets a tone and then gets a reward. So this is what happened when he just gets a reward. The cell is active. Here every little dot is when the cell is active, every line is a trial. If he gets the tone before the reward, the cell is active at the moment of the tone. And if there's a reward there's a stimulus but no reward, the cell shuts down. So one cell of the brain is not representing only how the juice tastes like, but it's eventually having an impact on the cognitive aspect of a reward. So we want to explore cognitive flexibility, decision making, spatial navigation, and metacognition. And all of these topics are really relevant for what we want to do with our AI. One example is in the hippocampus that is responsible for how we go through space and how we memorize. In the 70s, we discovered that the concept of a place cells, which are neurons that respond only where the animal is at a specific spot. Later, we discovered that the entorhinal cortex has cells that are responding on making a grid of the environment and that are active at regular intervals. So if I go here, it will fire. I go a bit further, it will fire. And these cells are like this, mapping the environment. Some of them have a grid of 10 centimeters, some of them have a grid of 2 meters. And by using this concept of grid cells and place cells, as well as the velocity and of the animal, the researchers were able to reproduce this cognitive system into a fully autonomous robot that had way better performance than anything we could do with using simply sensors and GPS or whatever. If you want to learn more about some neuroscience artificial intelligence, I found a really interesting reviews that explain how neuroscience inspired the way AI can understand intuitively physics or imagine realistic dream environments. But I think it's a bit too complex for today. So in the end, I think there's quite a lot to do with the cognitive neuroscience because reproducing the anatomy one by one will be too complex for the computers that we have now, but extracting the features of the information, knowing what we feed our deep learning network with, what is the relevant info, this can really help improve artificial intelligence. Yeah, thank you.